Hello there, listeners. It's Susie New here from the Australian Society of Anaesthetists, and thank you for listening to our podcast. It's called Australian Anaesthesia, and this is episode 10 of a little series that we have called Talking Money, where we do more than talk money. We discuss the professional, economic and business aspects of running an anaesthetic practice in Australia. We understand you went to med school to learn how to become a doctor, and that learning how to run a business may have been the last thing on your mind. We want to share this information with you so that you can focus on the important task of caring for your patients. Are you curious about what other anaesthetists charge? Well, we can't share that information with you directly, but we can deduce it from the APRA figures. That's the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority. In this episode, past president of the Australian Society of Anaesthetists and data guru, Dr. Andrew Mulcahy, goes through the latest APRA report and gleans what he can about the billing patterns of anaesthetists in private practice. He also compares it with that of other specialists. We talk about the no and known gap products that are available from private health insurers and what the average anaesthetic out-of-pocket fee might be. I'm sharing with you today a snippet of our conversation. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for meeting up with me this morning.
My pleasure.
Good to see you. And
good to be here.
We're going to be talking about APRA.
Not APRA.
Let's first of all start by defining what is APRA.
So APRA is a government statutory body called the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority. And that looks after all the various organisations that have to report to government, and amongst many, many functions, it collects an enormous amount of data. They collect data from all the private health insurers, and they also look at the governance of private health insurers, they look at their finances, they look at their management expenses, and they look at annual reports. But of interest to us is they look at data collected on every single service provided to a patient who is covered by a private health insurer. So for most patients, that's going to be inpatients in a private hospital, but there'll be patients who are privately insured who use that private insurance in public hospitals as well. It won't cover self-insured patients, it won't cover DVA, third-party compensable or public in private. It won't cover those, but any patient that's covered by a private health insurer. There used to be a separate organisation called PHIAC, Private Health Insurance Administration Council, and they did the same job but in more detail, but that was removed as a budgetary measure by the Abbott government actually. Also, there was a Private Health Insurance Ombudsman, but that was also removed. And those functions have been brought into, for PHIAC, into APRA, and for the Health Insurance Ombudsman into the National Ombudsman. So there's still that work being done, but perhaps not in the same level of detail. But nevertheless, lots of data, and we can see a lot of trends with it.
And so we're lucky on two accounts. So they seem to release their data quarterly.
Correct.
And we're lucky that you are really good at looking at the data and analysing it.
The data tells the full story. We all have our own personal experience, and some of us who work with the ASA have the experience of a lot of other people and our members and people we meet and talk to, but in this data is every single service. So most of what happens we don't hear about and we're not involved in, of course. So this really tells the full story, and fortunately it's released at least every quarter.
Great. And so today we're going to go and have a deep dive into the quarter that was finishing in June 2022.
Yeah, that's the most recent data available at the moment.
And so what are some of the highlights in there from your point of view?
The things that I'm always interested in is what's called the no gap rate. So firstly, there's data applying to all medical services in Australia. So in a quarter, there might be about 8 to 9 million services, and generally a service is the equivalent of a Medicare item number. So there's about 32 to 34 million services per year. Out of all Medicare, there's over 500 million. So most services are outpatient, but we're talking about inpatient, privately insured patients.
And just to clarify, that's not an episode of care, because a single episode of care can have multiple services attached to it.
Almost always does. Multiple services and multiple practitioners, multiple providers. But if we look at the no gap rate for all medical services, it remains high at 88.6%. For people who don't follow this, they might think that's a lot higher than what I read about in the media. And it is. So 88.6% of all medical services in hospital are at no out-of-pocket.
Thank you for listening to the Australian Anaesthesia podcast, which can be found on all the major podcast hosting platforms, as well as YouTube. This podcast is produced by the Australian Society of Anaesthetists and hosted by Dr. Susie New, with music created by Dr. Mark Seuss. The ASA was formed in 1934, and our vision is for every anaesthetist in Australia to be at their best, providing the highest quality anaesthesia and perioperative care through excellent technical and non-technical skills. We also hope that this means that you are functioning at your best when you're away from work. In this podcast, we have conversations that seek to inform, challenge, and inspire you to keep you performing at your best. Members of the ASA can access full versions of all episodes by logging into the ASA website at asa.org.au. If you are listening on your favourite podcast app, then make sure you look at the episode notes for the direct link to the podcast on the ASA website. Also, feel free to follow or subscribe so that you can receive the latest episodes as we do publish regularly. If you have any questions or feedback, please feel free to email us on podcast@asa.org.au. Thank you for your time, and we hope you enjoyed listening.